I'm going to tell you a story called Teig O'Kane and the Corpse. A long time ago in Ireland, there lived a wealthy farmer with one son, whose name was Teig O'Kane. Teig's mother had died long ago, and as a result, his father indulged him in anything he wanted to do. He would never hear a word against him, and if Teig needed money, he could have it. And as a result, Teig grew up to be a very wild and reckless young man. Instead of working on the farm, he was always out drinking at the pub or gambling or chasing girls. And no matter what anyone said, his father gave him a free hand. And the people in the village used to shake their heads, and they all said to each other, well, it won't be a year after the old man passes away before the son runs through all his inheritance. And the wits of the pub even made up a tune about him. Oh, look at that rogue, it's for kisses he's rambling. It isn't much wonder, for that is his way. He's like an old hedgehog, at night he'll be rambling from that place to this, and he'll sleep in the day. And as time went on, Teig's behavior got worse and worse. And his father still let him do what he liked until one day, his father got word that Teig had ruined the reputation of a good girl in the village. And his father was so angry, he called Teig into his study, and he said to him, "Son, you know I've always let you do whatever you liked, with not a word against you, but today I have heard something about you which has disgusted me with you. And I will give you two choices. You can marry the girl and inherit my farm and my money, or you can refuse and I'll leave everything to my sister's son." Teig was so upset and angry he wanted to defend himself, but his father had already walked out of the room. And Teig was so upset he didn't know what to do. So to clear his head, he walked out of the house and onto the road with his thoughts swirling around in his head. And as he walked along, he was thinking, well, as a matter of fact, he was in love with the girl whose name was Mary. And he did want to marry her, but he hated being told he had to do anything. And so Teig was thinking to himself that, well, of course I'll marry Mary, but I think I can wait a little while longer. There's plenty more fun to be had first. And he walked, and when he finally came out of himself, he realized that it was very late. He'd been walking for hours, and he had no idea where he was. So he turned to head home, but he had hardly begun when he heard voices on the path up ahead. And as they drew closer, he realized they were speaking in no language that he could understand. It wasn't Irish. They weren't English. Good God, he thought, could it be their French? But as they drew closer and he could see them, he saw that it was 6 little men wearing green caps and gray cloaks, and they were carrying something heavy between them. And then they stopped right in front of him, and to his horror, he saw that what they were carrying was the corpse of a man. And they threw the corpse at his feet. And the little man, who was apparently their leader, looked up at Teig and said, "Isn't it lucky you met us, Teig O'Kane?" And he was so frightened that for the first time in his life, Teig was speechless. And again the little man spoke. "Isn't it timely we met you, Teig O'Kane?" And again Teig said nothing. And for the third time the little man said, "Isn't it timely and lucky we met, Teig O'Kane?" And when for the third time Teig said nothing, the little man was delighted. "Ha! We have you now, Teig O'Kane. You belong to the Faerie Folk. And we can tell you whatever we want you to do, and you've got to do it. And the first thing we want you to do is pick up that corpse." And finally, Teig's old self came into the fore. He hated being told what to do, and he said, "I won't do it." "You will do it, Teig O'Kane, and if you won't do it willingly, we'll make you do it." And with that, the little men piled onto Teig, and they pushed him to the ground with his face in the dirt, and they picked up the corpse and pressed it against his back with his cold hands around his neck and its knees around his hips. And then Teig jumped up, and like a horse trying to shake a rider, he began to try and knock the corpse off his back. And the little man just looked at him and said, "If you wish to be rid of that corpse, then you must do what we say. And what we tell you is you must bury that corpse in the old burial ground up the road. You must go in and pry up the flagstones and dig in the clay and bury him there. But if you find that another man has the bed, so to speak, you will have to go to the next burial ground." And altogether the little man named 5 abandoned burial grounds. And he said to Teig, "Now it may be that you'll be able to bury him in one, and maybe not. But if you have not buried this man and put him in the earth before the sun comes up, then you will be ours forever." And with a kick in the backside and plenty of laughter, they sent Teig stumbling up the road with the corpse on his back. He came to the first burial ground and walked through the gate up to the door of the old church. But when he tried the door, it was locked. He tried taking out his knife and prying it open, but the wood was so rotten that he couldn't move it. And he was just wondering what to do when a voice said, right beside his ear, "Look for the key on top of the wall or above the door." "What? Who said that?" "It is I, the corpse, that spoke to you." "You can speak?" "Now and again." Well, Teig looked around and he found the key above the door. He unlocked it and went inside. The moonlight was shining through the windows, and he could see against the altar an old spade. So he picked it up and he used it to pry up the flagstones, and he began to dig into the soft clay. But he hadn't dug very far when he struck something soft, and moving the earth away, he saw the face of another corpse. And he turned to the corpse and said, "Well, can I bury you here anyway?" And when the corpse didn't respond, he kept on digging. But as soon as he touched the corpse again, it shot up bolt upright and shrieked, "Hey, you clown! Ho, you clown! Who is this fellow that's got no bed?" And it began shrieking, and it didn't stop until Teig quickly shoveled more dirt over its face. And then it lay back and was quiet. And he knew he would not be able to bury the corpse there. So he put the flagstones back in place and went back out and began stumbling down the road. "I'm not sure where to go," he said. "You go that way to the next church," said the corpse. And so he went until he came to the next one, which was even more decayed than the first. There were only some crumbling stones around the perimeter, and there was no roof on the church at all. And Teig went up and approached the entry, but then he noticed that there were people milling around in the churchyard. And then he noticed that their clothes were ancient, and he could see right through them. And they faced him and began speaking, but no sound came out. And he thought they looked harmless enough, but as soon as he stepped across the threshold, they crowded around him so thickly that he couldn't go forward another inch. But as soon as he stepped back out, they moved away, and he knew he wouldn't be able to bury them there. "Go to the next one," said the corpse, and it pointed the way, and Teig stumbled along with the corpse on his back. Now the third burial ground was even more decrepit than the second one. There wasn't even a building standing, just a crumbling wall. And he walked over, and he was just about to step in when he actually tripped on a stone and fell across the threshold. And as soon as he did, he was seized as though by massive hands, and then he was shaken like a terrier shakes a rat, and then he was throttled by the hands, and they threw him over the edge and into a ditch. And he lay there in the ditch for a while with the corpse still on his back, feeling despair. But finally he climbed back out and onto the road. And he walked until he came to the next burial ground. And this one was even more decayed than the others, with just some stones in the corners. And he thought it looked, well, no worse than the others. But as soon as he set foot across the threshold, a great streak of lightning hit the earth. It was streaked with white and yellow and red, and he jumped back just in time because it began to circle around and around and around the perimeter of the burial ground. And as it went faster and faster, more colors were added into it. And in spite of all his problems, he thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. But he knew that he could not bury the corpse there. And he went back to the road and stumbled on to the next one. Well, by the time he came to the last burial ground, he could see the sky beginning to grow lighter on the horizon. And he walked in and he looked around, but there wasn't a hole or a gravestone. And he thought, oh, if only I'd bought the spade from the first place. But then he almost fell right into a freshly dug grave. And looking down, he saw a shining black coffin at the bottom. He jumped down into the hole and he pried open the lid, and to his relief, he saw that the coffin was empty. And he turned to the corpse saying, "Shall I bury you here?" But the corpse loosened its grip around his neck and fell right into the coffin with a plop. Well, quickly, Teig pushed the lid over the coffin, and then he jumped out of the hole, and using his hands and feet, he pushed all the earth back into the hole. When it was done, he stamped up and down upon it. Well, the sun was just coming up as he walked out of that burial ground, and he walked along the road until he came to an inn. And when he got there, he was surprised to learn that he must have walked 25 miles that night. Well, he got a room, and he went to bed, and he slept all that day, and all that night, and all the next day, and all the next night. In the morning, he had a meal and hired a horse, and he rode back to his father's house. And when Teig rode into the town, all the villagers were delighted to see him, because when he hadn't come back for 2 nights, they were certain he must have sailed away to America or Australia. And he went first to Mary's house and then to see his father. And he was a changed man from that day on. Never again did he take to the road, drinking and gambling. And the next time he celebrated was on his wedding day, the day he married Mary. And from that day until their last day, Teig O'Kane and his father and Mary lived happily ever after.